The night shattered with a scream that ripped through the silence of the small apartment. Ah! Sarah held her son tightly against her chest, trembling as the walls seemed to close in. Her ex-husband, Mark, stormed toward the door, his eyes burning with rage. Sarah said, "Please, don't do this to him, he's just a child." Mark's voice roared back, "You'll regret crossing me, Sarah." The sound of his footsteps echoed in her ears as he yanked the door open. The slam was thunderous, shaking her to her core. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, a cruel reminder that the world outside remained indifferent. Her son's sobs pressed into her shoulder, his little arms clutching her as though she was the only safe place left. Sarah whispered, "It's okay, I've got you. I promise." But inside, her thoughts spiraled into chaos, her mind already racing through what was lost and what was at stake. The air was thick, heavy with betrayal, as the room seemed to remember every sacrifice she had ever made. Tonight, everything had changed. The fight had only just begun. Sarah sat frozen, her arms aching from holding onto her son for so long. The silence after the door slam pressed heavy against her chest. She whispered, "You're safe with me, I promise." Her son's sobs quieted, though his small body trembled. The apartment felt too small, the walls closing in with memories of what had just happened. She tried to slow her breathing, but fear clung like smoke, refusing to leave. The sirens outside faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of the boys' uneven breaths. Sarah thought of the years spent sacrificing everything to keep this home together. Tonight, it felt like it was all unraveling. The shadows seemed to hold secrets she wasn't ready to face. "We'll get through this," she whispered, though doubt burned inside her. Her child leaned back slightly, his red-rimmed eyes searching her face. Sarah forced a small smile, though her heart screamed, knowing that smile was a fragile mask. The boy shifted uneasily, his small voice breaking through the silence. "Mom, is he coming back?" Sarah felt her chest tighten, her mind racing for an answer she could believe in. "Not tonight," she said softly, her words trembling with uncertainty. His little hands clung to her shirt as though he could anchor himself against a storm. She rocked him slowly, humming a broken tune from his childhood. Her mind replayed the rage in Mark's face, the venom in his words, and the crash of the door. Every sound was etched into her bones. She thought of the promises she made when he was born, that no matter what, she would protect him. Now, that promise felt like a test she might not survive. Her son's breathing steadied, though fear lingered in his eyes. "I'll keep us safe," she whispered again, not just to him but to herself, a vow she wasn't sure she could keep. Sarah eased her son onto the couch, tucking a worn blanket around him. He sniffled, his cheeks still wet, but exhaustion weighed down his little body. She sat at the edge, her hands gripping tightly to keep herself from breaking. The silence felt like punishment, every second replaying what had just happened. Sarah glanced at the toys scattered across the floor, remnants of innocence she was desperate to protect. The clock ticked, each sound sharp, cruel. She whispered, "It's just you and me now," her voice cracking as tears threatened again. Her son mumbled, "I don't want him here anymore," his eyes half closed in drowsy honesty. Sarah's heart ached, knowing the truth was far more complicated. She brushed his hair gently back and forced a smile. "Sleep, sweetheart," she whispered, while inside fear gnawed at her, fear that the battle had only begun. The apartment finally grew still, but Sarah couldn't rest. She sat in the darkened kitchen, staring at the window where faint city lights blinked distantly. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. She thought of the years she spent sacrificing everything to build stability for her son. Tonight it all felt shattered. She buried her face in her hands, replaying the anger in Mark's eyes, the sound of her son's sobs, the terror that wrapped around her heart. "You're all I have," she whispered to herself, the words breaking the silence like glass. She couldn't let fear paralyze her, not now. Her son needed her to be strong, but the weight of betrayal pressed down relentlessly. She took a shaky breath, lifting her head as determination flickered through the tears. Somewhere deep inside, Sarah knew this was the start of a fight that would define them both. The morning light crept through thin curtains, washing the small apartment in pale gray. Sarah forced herself out of bed, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her mind sharper than ever. She glanced at her son still asleep on the couch, his small frame curled under the blanket. The clock ticked cruelly toward the hour she dreaded. Today she had to face her workplace after another night of chaos. She brewed coffee, its bitter aroma filling the kitchen, though her stomach churned too much to drink. "I can't lose this job," she whispered, knowing rent, food, and security depended on it. Her reflection in the window stared back, worn, haunted, but determined. She thought of the whispers that already circled in the office, the judgment of coworkers who never saw the battles she fought outside those walls. She would plaster on a smile, even if it cracked at the edges. For her son, she couldn't afford to fall apart. The office buzzed with chatter as Sarah entered, clutching her bag tightly against her side. Fluorescent lights glared above, unkind to her pale face and sleepless eyes. She tried to keep her head high, but whispers seemed to follow her steps. "She's late again," someone muttered, though they thought she couldn't hear. She pressed on, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Her manager's sharp eyes tracked her from across the room, a silent judgment cutting deeper than words. Sarah forced a smile when a coworker greeted her, though the warmth didn't reach her eyes. She thought of her son waiting for her return tonight, and how each paycheck was a lifeline. "I just have to make it through the day," she told herself silently. But the walls felt like they were closing in, and every hushed conversation seemed like another attack against her fragile dignity. At noon, Sarah sat in the break room, staring at her untouched sandwich. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence, broken only by hushed laughter from the hallway. Her best friend, Emily, entered, her smile warm, but her tone sharp. "You look like hell," Emily said, sliding into the chair across from her. Sarah forced a small laugh, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Row night," she admitted quietly. Emily's gaze softened, but she didn't let Sarah off easy. "You can't keep carrying this alone," she said firmly. Sarah looked down, her hands trembling as she picked at the sandwich crust. "If I stop holding it together, everything falls apart," she whispered. Emily reached across the table, her hand steady on Sarah's. "Then let me hold part of it," she replied. Sarah blinked, her heart torn between relief and guilt. She wanted to believe she wasn't alone. The thin envelope arrived that evening, its plainness masking the storm it carried. Sarah's hands shook as she slit it open, her son peering curiously from the couch. Her eyes skimmed the words: legal summons, custody hearing, deadlines. Her stomach dropped, the room spinning as if the floor had been pulled away. "Mom," her son's small voice asked. She forced her lips into a fragile smile, though her throat burned with panic. "Just some papers," she said, folding it quickly, but her trembling fingers betrayed her. She stepped into the kitchen, clutching the envelope against her chest, her breathing ragged. The silence of the apartment mocked her. Every fear she had buried now stared back in black and white. She pressed her forehead to the cool wall, whispering, "They won't take you away from me." But her heart knew this fight would demand everything she had left. That night, Sarah tucked her son into bed, her hands smoothing the blanket with trembling precision. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with questions he couldn't fully voice. "Mom, are we in trouble?" he asked softly. The words pierced her like a blade. She kissed his forehead, forcing a steady voice. "No, sweetheart, we're going to be fine." But inside her heart quaked. She sat beside him until his breathing slowed into sleep, his small hand gripping hers. The quiet of the room was fragile, the shadows on the walls too heavy. Sarah tiptoed back into the living room, the unopened envelope on the table like a ticking bomb. She stared at it, every part of her screaming with dread, yet underneath the fear, a fire flickered. Fierce, desperate, unstoppable. She whispered to herself, "I will fight for him no matter what it takes." The vow echoed in the stillness. The summons weighed heavier than stone, and Sarah felt its pressure everywhere she went. At work, her manager called her into the office, his tone sharp and final. "You've been late too often, Sarah," he said coldly. She tried to explain, her voice trembling, but the words came out fractured. He didn't care about broken homes, sleepless nights, or court dates. He cared about productivity. Sarah nodded, swallowing the tears that clawed at her throat. She thought of her son, of the bills piled on the table, and of the suffocating fear that losing this job meant losing more than money. Her hands shook as she left his office, co-workers glancing at her as though she carried a scarlet letter. The walls of the building felt like they were closing in, suffocating her. She whispered to herself, "I can't lose everything at once. Not now." But the fight outside was already bleeding into every corner of her fragile world. That evening, Sarah sat at the small kitchen table, bills spread out like vultures circling her. Numbers swam before her eyes, the math never adding up. Her son sat quietly at the counter, sketching with crayons, though his glances toward her spoke volumes. She clenched her jaw, calculating what to cut. Groceries, utilities, or hope itself. Her best friend Emily called, her voice bright, but edged with worry. "You sound exhausted," she said. Sarah laughed bitterly. "Exhaustion's free. At least I can afford that." The silence between them carried more truth than words. Sarah stared at the envelope on the table, the summons, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. She whispered, "He's going to try to take him from me." Emily's voice sharpened. "Then you fight harder than you've ever fought." Sarah closed her eyes, gripping the phone as if it could hold her together. That night, Sarah awoke to the sound of her son's cries. She rushed into his room, finding him curled in bed, tears streaking his cheeks. "I dreamed he took me away," he sobbed, clutching her hand. Sarah's heart broke as she pulled him close, whispering, "I won't let that happen." His small body shook as though the nightmare still clung to him. She rocked him gently, humming a lullaby she hadn't sung in years. The room smelled faintly of crayons and childhood, a bittersweet reminder of innocence she was desperate to protect. Her son's breath slowed, but his grip never loosened. Sarah gazed at him, her chest aching with both fear and fierce love. The darkness outside the window pressed in, but she clung to the light in his eyes. She thought, "If I have to fight the whole world to keep him safe, I will." The following weekend, Sarah's neighbor introduced her to Daniel, a man who had just moved into the building. His smile was kind, his tone warm, and for a moment, Sarah felt her walls soften. "You must be Sarah," he said, offering a hand. She hesitated, then shook it, her eyes guarded but curious. Daniel was charming, not in an overwhelming way, but in a quiet, steady manner that disarmed her. Her son peeked shyly from behind her, and Daniel crouched down, smiling gently. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. And the boy's lips curled into the smallest smile. Sarah felt something stir inside her, a mix of hope and fear. It had been years since she'd allowed herself even a thought of companionship. But as Daniel's presence lingered, she wondered if letting him in was strength or distraction. Trust was a dangerous game, and she couldn't risk another betrayal. That night, Sarah sat by the window, watching city lights flicker like distant stars. Her son slept soundly in the next room, his earlier fear softened into peaceful breaths. But her thoughts churned. Mark was gathering weapons of lies, ready to use them in court. Every bill, every late arrival, every whispered rumor at work felt like ammunition against her. She pressed her forehead against the glass, whispering, "I can't afford to slip." Yet Daniel's smile replayed in her mind, a sliver of warmth piercing the darkness. Could she let herself feel something beyond survival? The question haunted her as much as the legal battle ahead. She clenched her fists, steadying herself. "No matter what, I'll fight for him," she vowed. The reflection staring back in the glass looked stronger than she felt, but maybe, just maybe, strength began with belief. The knock at the door startled Sarah late in the evening. Now. She opened it to find her estranged sister, Rachel, someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly 10 years. The sight struck like a ghost come to life. Rachel's expression was uncertain, her eyes carrying both guilt and hope. I know I'm the last person you want to see, she said softly, her voice trembling. Sarah's chest tightened, memories of betrayal and abandonment flooding her. Her son peeked from behind her, confusion etched on his face. Sarah's instincts screamed to shut the door, to keep this chaos out, but a deeper part of her hesitated. Rachel added, I came because I know what Mark is planning and you're going to need me. Sarah's grip on the doorknob faltered. For years she carried the burden alone, and now the past was reaching for her in the most unexpected way. Rachel stepped inside hesitantly, her gaze sweeping across the cluttered apartment. Sarah crossed her arms, defensive. Why now? She demanded, her tone sharp as broken glass. Rachel's shoulders slumped, her voice heavy. Because I couldn't stay silent any longer. Mark reached out to me. The words struck like lightning, burning with betrayal. Sarah's eyes widened, fury rising. You've been in touch with him, she snapped. Rachel nodded, tears brimming. I regret it, but he told me things he plans to use against you. Sarah's chest tightened, her hands trembling as she processed the confession. Her son, sensing the storm, retreated quietly to his room. Sarah whispered, Do you have any idea what this could cost me? Rachel's voice cracked. That's why I'm here, to make it right. The night deepened as Rachel revealed the secrets. Mark had been gathering information, twisting half-truths about Sarah's finances, her late arrivals at work, even her past mistakes. He'll paint you as unstable, Rachel admitted, her words trembling. Sarah sank into the couch, the weight of betrayal suffocating her. Of course he would, she whispered bitterly. Rachel sat across from her, wringing her hands. I can testify for you if you'll let me. I know things about him that no one else does. Sarah studied her sister, torn between mistrust and desperate need. Her mind screamed with anger, but her heart whispered that perhaps this broken bond could become her only shield. Why should I trust you now? She asked sharply. Rachel's eyes glistened. Because I finally understand what it means to lose everything. And I don't want that for you. Later, after Rachel left, Sarah sat at the table staring at the unopened envelope again, her mind echoing with her sister's words. The apartment was quiet, her son asleep, but silence felt more like a burden than peace. The offer of help haunted her. Could she risk letting Rachel back into her life? Could she bear more betrayal if it came? Her hands trembled as she pressed her forehead into them, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She thought of every sleepless night she had endured alone, every time she chose sacrifice without support. For the first time she considered the possibility of leaning on someone else. The thought terrified her, but exhaustion had carved deep scars, and perhaps trust was no longer a choice, but a necessity. The next morning, Sarah walked her son to school, her thoughts swirling with unease. He held her hand tightly, his small fingers anchoring her. Mom, will everything be okay? He asked quietly. She bent down, kissing his forehead. Yes, sweetheart, I promise. But inside, doubt consumed her. She watched him run toward the school doors, his backpack bouncing, his smile brave, though uncertain. Sarah lingered at the gate, staring at the world that seemed so much simpler for him. She thought of Rachel's face, of Mark's threats, of the shadows closing in. She whispered to herself, this fight is bigger than me now. As her son vanished inside, Sarah squared her shoulders. For him, she would carry the weight of the world, even if it crushed her. In the lawyer's office, the air felt heavy with documents and judgment. Sarah sat stiffly as her attorney, Mr. Carter, explained the uphill battle ahead. Mark has money, influence, and he is playing dirty, he said flatly. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap, every muscle coiled with fear. But the truth is on your side, he added, meeting her gaze. The words offered little comfort. She thought of her son's face, of the nights spent rocking him back to sleep, and wondered if any truth mattered in a system designed to weigh wealth over sacrifice. Her sister Rachel sat beside her, a silent presence, her jaw tight with regret. We'll need every piece of evidence we can get, Mr. Carter continued. Sarah nodded, her chest burning. She whispered, Then I'll give you everything I have, even if it's all that's left of me. At home, Sarah found Mark waiting in the hallway, his presence like a shadow she couldn't escape. "You really think you'll win?" he sneered, his voice low and venomous. Sarah's breath caught, but she held her ground. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she replied, though her heart pounded wildly. His lips curled into a smirk. "You'll lose him, Sarah. You'll lose everything." The words struck harder than fists. Her son peeked from the cracked door, his small face pale with fear. Sarah stepped forward, blocking Mark's view. "You will not touch him," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the tremor inside. Mark laughed coldly, turning on his heel before vanishing into the stairwell. Sarah closed her eyes, steadying herself against the wall. The battle was no longer distant. It was here, pressing at her very door. That night, Rachel confessed the darker truth. She had once sided with Mark during Sarah's lowest years, believing his lies. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice breaking. Sarah's chest ached with betrayal renewed, but she listened, her heart torn between fury and the faintest spark of forgiveness. "You left me when I needed you most," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Rachel nodded, tears sliding freely. "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Silence hung heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Sarah pressed her hands against the table, grounding herself. She wanted to scream, to throw Rachel out again, but she also wanted to believe people could change. For her son's sake, maybe she needed an ally, no matter how flawed. She whispered, "Don't fail me again." Rachel nodded, her eyes shining with determination. As the hearing neared, Sarah found strength in quiet moments with her son. One evening, she helped him with homework at the kitchen table, his small voice reciting words with determined effort. Sarah smiled faintly, though fear still haunted her eyes. "You're so smart," she whispered, ruffling his hair. He looked up at her and said, "I don't need to be smart. I just need you." The words struck deep, a reminder of why she fought, why she endured. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his hair. For a moment, the storm outside didn't exist. It was only the two of them, holding on to each other against the world. But when he finally fell asleep, Sarah sat alone with the silence, her gaze fixed on the stack of legal papers. The fight loomed like a monster waiting in the dark, but she knew love had already given her a weapon stronger than fear. On the eve of the trial, Sarah stood alone by the window, city lights flickering below. The room was silent, her son asleep, Rachel resting in the other room. She whispered, "Tomorrow decides everything." Her reflection stared back, weary but unbroken. Memories of sacrifice pressed in, nights working late, tears shed in secret, promises whispered to her son. Tomorrow, all of it would be put on display, judged by strangers who couldn't possibly understand. Yet, in the depths of her fear, a flame flickered, small but steady. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering, "We will win, because we have to." The words weren't just a vow. They were survival itself. She took a deep breath, steadying her trembling hands. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would walk into that courtroom with every piece of strength love had carved into her soul. The courtroom felt colder than Sarah had imagined. She sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles whitened. Mark sat across the aisle, his smug smirk carved into her mind like a scar. The judge entered, silence falling heavy as stone. Sarah glanced at her son seated in the back, his small figure dwarfed by the towering benches. She whispered a prayer under her breath, not for victory but for strength. Her lawyer, Mr. Carter, leaned close. "Remember, the truth is your ally. Breathe and tell it." Sarah nodded, though her heart thudded against her ribs like a drum of war. The gavel struck, and the battle began. Mark's lawyer painted Sarah as unstable, citing late arrivals to work, overdue bills, and even moments of exhaustion as evidence of neglect. Each word felt like a knife, twisting deeper. Sarah clenched her fists, struggling to keep tears from spilling. Mr. Carter rose calmly, countering with records of her sacrifices, steady employment despite struggles, medical records showing her son's health, testimony from teachers praising her devotion. The balance of the courtroom shifted slightly, though Mark's cold eyes still bore into her like poison. She caught her son's gaze from the back. He offered a small, shaky smile. It was enough to steady her. When Sarah was called to the stand, her legs felt like stone. She swore the oath and sat, the judge's gaze piercing. Mark's lawyer fired questions meant to break her. Why were you late? Why so many bills? Why no partner to help? Each one dragged her through shame. Her voice cracked but did not break. Because I've done everything alone, every night, every morning, every sacrifice, for my son. The room fell silent. The truth hung heavier than any accusation. She saw Rachel in the gallery, tears streaking her face. For the first time, Sarah felt the chains of silence snapping. She wasn't just defending custody. She was reclaiming her voice. Rachel was called to testify, her voice breaking as she admitted her past mistakes. She confessed Mark's manipulations, how he lied to her, how he twisted Sarah's struggles into weapons. I was blind, but I see now. She has carried more than anyone should, and she never stopped fighting for her son, Rachel declared. Mark's confident smirk faltered for the first time. Sarah's heart pounded, relief mingling with anguish. The courtroom murmured, tension shifting like a tide. For years Sarah carried the burden of betrayal, but hearing her sister's truth cracked something open. She gripped the edge of the table, whispering silently, maybe I'm not alone anymore. The final arguments rang out like thunder. Mark's lawyer pressed his last accusations, but the weight of Rachel's testimony and Sarah's truth stood firm. Mr. Carter's voice boomed with calm authority. This is not about wealth. It is about love, sacrifice, and who has stood by this child every moment of his life. The judge's gavel struck after long silence. Custody awarded to the mother. The words echoed like salvation. Sarah closed her eyes as tears fell, her son rushing into her arms. The courtroom blurred, sound fading until only his heartbeat against hers mattered. Victory was hers, but the scars would linger. The courthouse steps were bathed in afternoon light. As Sarah emerged, her son's hand clasped in hers. The air felt different, lighter, though the weight of battle still clung to her bones. Reporters lingered, their questions sharp, but she ignored them. What mattered was the small smile on her son's face, the relief in his eyes. Rachel walked beside them, silent but steady, as if her presence alone was an apology made flesh. Sarah whispered to her son, "We are free now." For the first time in years she allowed herself to breathe deeply, as though the chains around her chest had been cut away. The scars remained, but the path forward glimmered faintly in the sunlight. That evening, Sarah tucked her son into bed, the weight of victory still unreal. He looked up at her, his voice small but certain. "You kept your promise, Mom." Tears blurred her vision as she kissed his forehead. "I always will," she whispered. He drifted into sleep quickly, his face peaceful in a way she hadn't seen for months. Sarah sat beside him longer than necessary, memorizing every detail of his calm breathing, his hand curled loosely on the blanket. The fight had cost her nearly everything, but this moment was priceless. She realized then that the true victory wasn't the custody papers. It was the quiet security in her son's sleep, the unshakable bond they had carved through fire. Later, Sarah found Rachel sitting quietly in the kitchen. They exchanged a long, heavy silence. Finally, Rachel said, "I can't erase what I did, but I'll never abandon you again." Sarah's throat tightened, memories of pain and anger flickering, but she nodded. "If you mean it, then we start new." The two women sat across from each other, not as strangers burdened by betrayal, but as sisters clawing toward redemption. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a fragile bridge built out of broken pieces. Sarah knew trust would take time, but for now, Rachel's presence was enough. The war was over. The healing could begin. Sarah stood on the apartment balcony, the cool night air brushing her skin. The city below pulsed with life, yet for the first time, it didn't feel overwhelming. She thought of the trial, of Mark's downfall, of the fragile victories earned. But most of all, she thought of her son, safe and asleep inside. Anu. A deep breath filled her lungs, and she exhaled slowly, letting the weight fall away into the night sky. She whispered to herself, "We survive." The stars above twinkled faintly, distant yet steady, like promises waiting to be kept. Sarah realized healing wouldn't be swift, but she no longer feared the future. She had faced the storm and endured. In the final quiet moments, Sarah stood outside her son's door, her hand resting gently against it. Inside she could hear his steady breathing, a rhythm that became her anchor. She whispered softly, "We're stronger now, and we'll never stop fighting." A genuine smile broke across her face, not the mask she had worn for years, but a smile born of survival and hope. She entered the room and sat beside him, her hand brushing his hair gently as she watched him sleep. For the first time in a long time, peace filled her chest. The future remained uncertain, but she no longer feared it. Because whatever it held, she knew they would face it together. And that was enough.